right. Well, welcome to Hebrews Story Hour. I don't have my Mr. Rogers sweater on today. Hope that's okay. I've got it nearby if I need to, if I'm feeling like I need it. But we're going to be in Genesis 17. So there are a couple of covenantal kind of stories in Genesis, Abrahamic covenantal stories. We had Genesis 12, which we read in our first meeting, and then Genesis 15, where there's splitting of the animals, and then 17, which is, we might just say another covenantal story, but there are some different aspects in each of these. It sort of is not so important to the story itself, but if you're interested in these types of things, this one is usually associated with the kind of the priestly strand of the story. There's some priestly themes in Genesis 17. Okay, are we ready to read together? Lord bless the reading of his word. Genesis 17. Vayehi Avram ben Tish'im shana vatesha shanim. Vayera Adonai el Avram. Vayomer elav. Ani el Shaddai. Hithalek lefanai. Vehye tamim. Ve'etana veriti beini uveinecha. Ba'arbe otcha b'ma'od ma'od. All right, we'll stop there because that's where God's speech stops. This is a short version, short section here. So Avram was 99 years old, or a son of 90 years and 9 years, right? So Avram was 99 years old, and Yahweh appeared. So Vayera is the nifal of Ra'ah, to see, so to appear. Yahweh appeared to Avram, and he said to him, I am El Shaddai. Walk before me and be blameless. And I will give, or really, we're regularly going to be translating Natan as make or establish. I will make my covenant between me and you. And I will multiply, Arba is the Hifil, to make many, multiply you exceedingly, b'ma'od ma'od. Okay, verse 3. Vayipol Avram al panav, vayidaber ito Elohim lemor, ani hine veriti itach, v'hayita la'av hamon goyim. Verse 5. V'lo yikare od et shimcha Avram. V'haya shimcha Avraham. Ki av hamon goyim netaticha. Verse 6. V'hifreti otcha b'ma'od ma'od unetaticha l'goyim. Umalachim mimcha yetzeu. Verse 7. V'hakimoti et beriti beini uveinecha. Uvein zarecha acharecha. Acharecha. Ledorotam. Livrit olam. Leyot lecha leElohim. Ulezarecha acharecha, v'natati lecha ulezarecha acharecha, et eretz migurecha et kol eretz Canaan, la'achuzat olam, v'hayiti lahem leElohim. Okay, I know it's a large section, but I didn't want to break up God's speech. So all the way back to verse 3. Avram fell upon his face, and he said, and he spoke with him, with him. That is, God spoke with him. Elohim spoke with him, saying, as for me, look, my covenant is with you. So usually have hine first, right? But we have ani, so God's pointing to himself. As for my part, my covenant is with you. You will be as a father for a father of, Hamon is a multitude of nations, hagoyim. So a multitude of nations. Verse 5, and your name will no longer be called Avram. So you will no longer be named Avram, but your name will be Avraham, because Av Hamon, a father of a multitude of nations, I have made you. Or maybe we could talk about this. The perfect here is we get Vav plus perfect written just in the next verse, kind of, which in English we would translate in the future. You could say that this is kind of God's promise, so it's as good as done. It's kind of a completed action in that way. We can talk about that, I guess, if we want to. Verse 6, I will make you fruitful, para, to be fruitful, exceedingly, b'ma'od ma'od, and I will make you into nations, and kings will come out from you. Okay, verse 7, I will establish, hakimoti is from kum, the Hiphiel, 1 CS, I will establish my covenant between me and you, and between your offspring after you, for their generations, Dorotam, as a covenant forever, a berit olam, to be for you, well, to God, right? So as a God, or you're basically to be God for you, and your offspring who are after you. And I will make you and your offspring after you, or no, this is, I would say give. I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, a nominal form for gur, from gur, your sojournings, all the land of Canaan as for a possession forever. And I will be to them as a God. I will be God to them. Okay, verse 9. Vayomer Elohim el Avraham, va'ata et beriti tishmor, ata l'zarecha acharecha l'dorotam. Verse 10. Zot beriti asher tishmeru, beini uveinechem uvein zarecha acharecha, himol lachem kol zachar. Verse 11, unamaltem et basar orlatechem b'haya laot berit beini uvenechem uven shimonat shimonat yamim yemol lachem kol zachar ledorotechem yelid bayit umiknat kesef mikol ben nechar asher lo miz'arecha hu. Verse 13, Himol yemol yelid beitecha umiknat kaspecha, v'hayata veriti biv sarchem livrit olam. One more verse, verse 14. Va'arel zachar asher lo yimol et besar orlato v'nikrata hanefesh hachi me'ameha et beriti hefar. Okay, translating now back to verse 9. God said to Abraham, as for you, right? So we have ani earlier, but you, Mike, you will keep my covenant. You and your offspring, your seed, who are after you for their generations. This is my covenant that you will keep, y'all will keep between me and y'all. So there's a switch to a plural here. And between your offspring who are after you, here it is. Circumcise every male for yourselves. Or this is a nifal form, himol, which could be either an imperative or an infinitive absolute. They look the same. It's hard to make this consistently kind of passive, but it might be reflexive, sort of like circumcise yourself. You could say be circumcised. Every male should be circumcised who are among you or who belong to you. Then we get it in verse 11. You will circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. Or la is foreskin. And it will be as a sign of the covenant between me and you. And a son, verse 12, and a son of Shimonat Yamim, 8 days. So an 8-day-old will be circumcised for you all, every male. So this is the same construction. Every male who is when he is 8 days old will be circumcised for your generations. A child of the house, which is for Avram, would be like a child who is born among his servants. So this is part of Avram's household, but not his own kid. And one bought with silver or money from all the sons of a foreigner, right? So there's 2 different types of essentially slaves, one born into his house and one brought into his house through purchase. Who is not a part of your offspring. Okay, verse 13. He shall certainly, a child of your house and one purchased with your money shall certainly be circumcised. My covenant will be in your flesh as a covenant forever, a berit olam. Okay, verse 14, an uncircumcised male, kind of odd that we have an adjective before zachar here. You expect it after, but uncircumcised, it's attributive, I think. It breaks the rule. An uncircumcised male who will not be circumcised or who will not circumcise the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off, or the life, the nephesh of that life. So nephesh talking about the person, right? So that man, but that life shall be cut off from its people or his people. It's third hay suffix because it's referring to nephesh, which is feminine. He has broken my covenant. Okay, so hiphil, perfect, parar is the geminate verb. So he has broken, parar is to break. Okay, we're gonna switch gears a little bit, do verse with verse 15. So verse 15. Vayomer Elohim el Avraham, Sarai ishtcha, lo tikra et shema Sarai, ki Sarah shema. Verse 16. Uveirachti ota, v'gam natati mimena lecha bain. Uveirachtiha v'hayata legoyim malchei amim mimena yihyu. Okay, pausing again to translate. And God said to Avraham, Sarai, as for Sarai, your wife, you will not call her name Sarai, because her name is Sarah. And I will bless her, and I will also give from her to you a son. And I will bless her, and she will be for nations. Sometimes like a mother of nations is perhaps implied here. Kings of the peoples will come from her. Okay, verse 17. Vayipol Avraham al panav vayitzchak. Vayomer bilibo. Vayomer bilibo. Haleven mea shana yivaled ve'im Sarah havat tish'im shana teled. Vayomer Avraham el ha-Elohim lu Yishmael yichye lifanecha. Okay, stop again there. So Avraham fell on his face. Second time we've seen him falling on his face. And he laughed, Yitzchak. And he said in his heart, and we have the hey interrogative, plus the lamed, plus the ven. So is it to a son of 100 years that he will be born? Or Sarah, and even if Sarah maybe is will to a daughter of 90 years, will she give birth? I would say following the hey interrogative is usually or. So it's a continuation of the question. Verse 18, and Abraham said to God, oh, that Yishmael would live before you. And verse 19, Vayomer Elohim, aval Sarah ishtecha yoleret lecha ben, v'karata et shemo Yitzchak, v'hakimoti et beriti ito livrit olam lazar o acharav. Verse 20, ule Ishmael shamaticha hine barachti oto v'hifreti oto v'hirbeti oto bim'od ma'od shenem asar nisiim yolid unatativ v'goy gadol. And verse 21, ve'et beriti akim et Yitzchak asher teled lecha Sarah lamoed hazeh ba'shana ha'acheret. And then finally, verse 22, vayechal lidaber ito vaya'al Elohim me'al Avraham. Okay, now going back to 17 for translation. Wait, no, we translated that. Going back to verse 19. And God said, aval, which is truly, or it's like a particle, maybe no. We'll go with no. losing my place. No, Sarah, your wife, or Sarah, your wife is bearing for you a son, and you will call his name Yitzchak, and I will establish my covenant ito with him as a covenant forever, a berit olam, for his seed after him. Verse 20, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Look, I have blessed him, or I am blessing him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him exceedingly. Ma'od, ma'od. Shenaim Asar is 12. So Asar is the 2-part. Shenaim is the, well, Asar is the 10-part. Shenaim is the 2-part. 12. 12 princes, Nisi'im, he will beget, and I will give him, or I will make him as a great nation, or into a great nation. And I will establish, now verse 21, Akim, I will raise up my covenant. So there's fronting here with et beriti, but my covenant I will establish with Isaac, who Sarah will bear for you. At Moed is like this time or this season, or with Hazeh, at this season in the next year, Shana ha'acheret. And he finished speaking with him, and God went up from Abraham. Okay, we have one more section, verse 23. Vayakach Abraham et Yishmael beno ve'et kol yiledei ve'to ve'et kol miknat kaspo kol zachar ve'anshe beit Avraham vayamol et basar orlatam be'etzem hayom hazeh ka'asher deber ito Elohim. Verse 24. Va'avraham ben tish'im va'tesha shana v'himolo basar orlato. Verse 25. V'yishmael beno ben shalosh esrei shana v'himolo et basar orlato. Verse 26, Ve'etzem hayom hazeh nim ol Avraham, Ve'yishmael beno, V'chol anshe ve'tcho yilid bayit, U'miknat kasif me'et ben nechar nimolu ito. Okay. Last section then of translation, verse 23. And Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and all the children of his house, or all the sons of his house, and all who are, this is clunky phrase in English, but the purchases of his silver. So every male bought with money, and among the men of the household of Abraham, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin. This is an idiom, but etzem hayom hazeh. So in that very time, or in that very day, is usually like the way English would make this, but like in the bone of this day. So etzem is bone, right? But obviously that's not an idiom that we would use. Occurs twice here. We're going to see it one more time, but in that very day, just as God had spoken with him. Abraham, verse 24, Abraham was, 99 years old when in his being circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. So when Abraham was 99 years old, when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old in his being circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. In that very day, verse 26, Abraham was circumcised and Ishmael, his son. And all the men of his household, the child of the house, the one purchased of silver from the son of a foreigner, they were circumcised with him. Okay, chapter 17. I wrote down a couple of things we might talk about, but any initial questions or reflections?
Can I ask, every once in a while I see like a straight vertical line between two words.
Yeah.
What is that significant, or is it just a?
It's an accent mark. I'm looking for one. Do you see one in particular?
In verse 8, et aretz. It's between.
Yes. Yeah. So okay. So if you it is. I looked this up the other day. It is the lightest of the disjunctive accents. So a vertical line to us might sort of symbolize like a major break or something, but it really doesn't signify that here. I mean, clearly 8 and eretz go together. It actually, that line and the little right angle under 8, right before it.
Yes. They're
actually they go together.
Okay.
Accent mark. I think it's called the Lagarma, if that means anything.
Not yet.
I don't know if I've said this in here before, but that little note card you get when you buy a VHS, it has all the accent marks. I feel like I've been saying this, but it's probably just my first year class. I always make a copy of each side of it and glue it in the back of my Bible. But if you have that, you would see it's number 18 on the, there's 2 sides. They use a different accentual system for Job, Proverbs, and Psalms. But the not Job, Proverbs, and side, you would see number 18 as Lagarma. And then if you look at number 19, it's a Munach, which in the verse you pointed out, Munach is the accent with eretz.
Okay.
So it's really not that significant, especially because it's such a minor pause. It's a disjunctive accent, but it's just like the lightest of all of them.
Okay.
Good. Other questions, grammatical or otherwise?
So I don't mean to talk all the time, but that's kind of my nature. Sorry. One of the things that I always think is interesting is that God promises to Abraham now, you're gonna have a son, and he falls on his face in laughter, like almost as if to say that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Right.
And it kind of comes. I think we talked about whenever he said, "This is my sister." Is he lacking faith?
Right. Yeah, so it's also like we're going to see another story, right? Chapter 18. That's usually associated with Isaac's name with Sarah's laughter. So, but this is the Abraham laughter story. And then it's probably important that right after that, he falls in his faith. This is all verse 17. And then in his heart, so he says to himself, right? It's sort of like this is the nature of his laughter, the impossibility of a child being born to a 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman. And that, when we get to chapter 18, next week, we'll see also sort of this kind of Sarah, her laughter is kind of hidden. She's in the tent, it's kind of away. And then there's this whole drama of, I didn't laugh. Oh, yes, you did laugh, like this back and forth. It's not really picked up on with Abraham. So for Sarah, it's kind of a sign of her disbelief more clearly. But I think it is for Abraham too, but the text itself is not trying to highlight that part of it as much as maybe chapter 18 is with Sarah. I wanted to go all the way back in verse 2. We have this name for God that's of interest, of El Shaddai, right? So in the text, when God, that are associated with the priestly strand of the story, where God makes a covenant with the patriarchs, and would see this with Isaac and Jacob, and later on in Genesis, El Shaddai is the name that's used for God. So Shaddai on its own is used several times throughout the Hebrew Bible. I think like 30 times in the book of Job. And it's perhaps kind of an old name that's associated with God. It's usually translated as Almighty, and it could have something to do with power. I think it also, we don't really know, but another convincing, potentially correct answer is that it's associated with the mountain, because it's cognate with a Hebrew word for mountain, or a non-Hebrew word. It's like a Semitic word for mountain. So it could be like God of the mountain or something like that. Really, I don't think it carries any of that meaning in a story like this. But El Shaddai seems to be a particular covenanting name in the priestly story. Where we get it most explicitly is in Exodus 6, verse 3. Flip over there with me. Of course, God is revealing himself as Yahweh. And in verse 3 of chapter 6, Ra, so I appeared, El Avraham, El Yitzchak, El Yaakov, so to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but El Shaddai, as El Shaddai. Ushemi Adonai, but my name is Yahweh, or by my name, and my name, Yahweh, Lo Nodati, I was not known. So there's sort of this Avraham, Isaac, and Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? These three patriarchs called upon God as El Shaddai, and they don't really know the name of Yahweh, or God doesn't reveal the name of Yahweh until the Exodus story. And we have other Genesis narratives where patriarchs call or recognize God as Yahweh. But in these covenanting texts, it seems they really coordinate with the Exodus 3 or Exodus 6 story, where God appears as El Shaddai. Comments or questions? Yeah, Dustin?
If Shaddai is Almighty, then that makes sense, because particularly in this covenanting circumstance, he's about to do a thing that I was thinking about with Jesus, as with man, this is not possible. But with God, all things are possible. So El Shaddai, the Almighty, is about to do the impossible as a verification of, I promised this is going to happen.
Yeah, so it becomes like a covenantal name, but that is associated with promise. You're right. I mean, God's certainly saying, I can do this thing that you think is impossible. And so I don't know that Almighty is right. I don't know that the mountain thing is right. I almost prefer to do a transliteration of El Shaddai. I wish English translations would do that, so you could see the continuity But El, of course, is a name for it. It's a descriptor name, but it's also a proper name in the Semitic. For Canaanites, the El would have been a god, and El is also a god for Israelites. It's just El is just another name for Yahweh in the biblical narrative. We've seen, what do we see? El Roi, where Hagar says, God of my seeing, right? So they're naming God according to their experiences. Okay, other questions or reflections? Circumcision is kind of an odd sign, right? Seems like we have this language of covenants and signs like back in Genesis 9. We didn't read this story together, but after the flood, and God makes a covenant with all of creation, and the sign of and it's called a Berit Olam, an eternal covenant. That's probably important. We have lots of Berits, but a Berit Olam, a covenant forever, like this is an unbreakable covenant where it's really more like a promise. Anyway, in chapter 9, we have that as well. And the sign, the oat of the Berit Olam is the rainbow. Here it's the in their flesh as circumcision. But it's not necessarily a very public sign, but it is something that, the men would participate in as sort of this is what we do as a reminder of our commitment to God and God's commitment to us. They weren't the only ones who circumcised in the ancient Near East. The Egyptians, the Canaanites, not the Philistines. The Philistines were uncircumcised, but the Moabites. This wasn't unique to Israel, even though the story kind of makes it sound that way. The Babylonians or the Mesopotamians didn't practice circumcision. So it's probably some sort of differentiation from either, early on, it would have been a differentiation from the Philistines. We are not the Philistines. Same reason they don't eat pigs, beyond just God said not to do it. The Philistines eat pigs. We are not the Philistines. So there's like this ethnic, it's the way that people have practices for saying this is who we are and this is who we're not. And circumcision seems to fall into that category, whether they're like the early Davidic, judge, the time of the judges where you have the uncircumcised Philistines versus the circumcised Israelites, or during the time of the Babylonian exile, where they're separating themselves from the Babylonians. The story would talk about their own identity in opposition to the other.
I have a question about the renaming.
Yeah.
So like in verse 5, I guess I'm a little confused about the key clause. I just don't know how it connects. Like the way I read that is like, I'll call you Abraham because you'll be you'll be the father of many nations. And I just don't know how that connects with the name Abraham. And does that make sense? Like it seems like it, and it's probably just I'm not aware of the Hebrew connection, but
right. Well, good question. It's not perfect, and most renamings don't make total sense grammatically, but it's the Ham, right? You have Av as father. So he goes from Avram. So what changes from Avram to Avraham? It's the addition of the Hey. And then the Mem. So this is the first part of Hamon, the multitude. So you put Av together with Ham, and you get Avraham, you get father, or Av together with Hamon, father of a multitude. But right, you don't have an explanation for the Resh there in Avram's name. But the name change coordinates with sort of his identity as a person where, well, and we have a fairly, unlike Sarai's name to Sarah, we have an explanation of it in verse 4, La'av Hamon Goyim. And I guess in the verse you read, because of Hamon, in that connection, there's our Abraham, the Ham part going with Av. With Sarai to Sarah, you also have the addition of a hey. So there's a symmetry between the name changes. Sarah means princess, but we don't have any explanation of why. I mean, we do have, according with her name change, she's going to be Legoyim, for nations, she'll become nations, and all of this as being sort of the matriarch and Abraham's counterpart, but there's not a obvious linguistic connection there in the name change. Does that make sense, Andrew, or do you?
Yeah, that does. I guess I was thinking more about Goyim and less about Hamon, so I just hadn't really seen that.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense though.
Good. Are there questions, Logan?
Yeah, before we get too much farther past the first few verses, I was looking back at chapter 15 when God makes his side of the covenant and passes between the pieces. And I just wonder if there's a connection between saying you walk and be blameless. Like, is this a metaphorical walk of his life, or is this connected to covenant making in the same sort of way as if there's some kind of ritual that is connected to this?
Yeah, it's got the hit pael of in verse 1, hitalech, which you might say walk around, but can I continually walking or something like that. It's actually something similar in Greek. Don't you have like peripateo, sort of walking around? I feel like this is really back in the dark ages of my brain, but I feel like in John, 1 John, that where you start with Greek, there's this kind of play on kind of continually walking. Anybody remember this? Does this sound right? Okay, well, you can just trust me then. I don't know, it's such a general term to say that it's connected with like passing through, or like the Genesis 15. I think the way I understand this, if it's I understand it metaphorically as kind of live before me and be blameless. But there is something perhaps to Abraham's life. He's a walker. I mean, he moves all around, and kind of like wherever he goes, be blameless. There's really not the ritual part of this story is circumcision. It's like, doesn't really seal the covenant, but it shows that a covenant has been made. We just don't really have like what we have. The difference between 15 narratively too, and this story is that we have a whole lot of dialogue here. This is just like mostly God speaking in chapter 17. Whereas in 15, God gives some direction, then we see like Abraham as an actor and doing all these like tangible things, and then darkness coming and fire, and there's just so much more. It's a theophany, like God showing up, and we have all this ceremony built around it. And I don't see that in 17. It's just God spoke with him. It's an encounter still. Abraham falls in his face twice. But I wouldn't probably say that the hitalech would represent any kind of particular any ceremony.
Yeah, that's sort of what I thought, and I did go back to 15, and it's a different verb, so there's no connection there or anything. But it's at least reminiscent, just the language of walking. And so I didn't know if there was any more to the ritual beyond. And 15, a connection to the walking here versus the ritual of circumcision, but just interesting connection of the two covenants regardless.
Absolutely. Like there's you can do kind of what's similar and what's not similar between those stories pretty easily. In my introduction class, we do like close readings, and if any of you are in that class, then we do a narrative passage where you do a markup and you read it like you would a good literary story. And Genesis 17 is often a popular text because it's it's an important text, but it doesn't make for a good story. Like it's mostly just God saying this is how it's going to be, and then Abraham but they're the only kind of juicy part of the story is with him laughing to himself and kind of this internal dialogue and so on. But then in the end, he's just all right. He immediately is obedient. So as far as a character, he's mostly just receiving and obeying. Whereas 15 makes for a really, I think, interesting, like kind of reading between the lines between things. More a mysterious story. Good. Other questions or reflections? Okay, it's all right. If there's not, I'll say one more thing, give you one more chance to ask if you want, and then we'll wrap up. But I am looking ahead, and I think I just want to do one chapter. I don't want to speed us along too much. One chapter is enough. So we're going to do 18 and 19. I like where we're going. Sodom and Gomorrah, we're like back to Lot. We have these like types of story. 17 is a particular covenantal type of text that we'll see again especially with Jacob, where blessing is invoked and the Burrito Lam comes back and El Shaddai comes back and so on. But 18 and 19, things get that, you have these messengers from God. And even the way that God appears in these different stories here, he's just like speaking. We have this phrase of God went up from him. So God encounters Abraham in this story, but there's not a lot of detail about what that looks like. Whereas in 15, we have fire and smoke and so on. In 18, we're going to get messengers, which one of which ends up being the Lord. And then 19, they have these, messengers of God too in Sodom and Gomorrah. And I'm really excited about reading these next couple of stories together. Okay, anything else?
I do wonder, let's see, where is this verse? I guess it's in verse 1, where we're just talking about walk before me. Is the panai, panav, face, kind of an idea? Is that the same root?
Yeah, it is. Panim is face. It's plural, right? So, but the panim is one face. Lifnei is just, at some point it's like to the face of, or an earlier point, but it pretty quickly becomes what we call grammaticalized. So this happens with language all the time, where it might start out as sort of having a more literal sense, and then becomes, lifnei essentially just becomes a preposition that means before. And it definitely means, it can have a spatial sense, like in front of, but it can also have a temporal sense. So it's better to not translate it. Usually, sometimes it does have this meaning, but usually like before my face, because it's just so normally used. It becomes like a part of the grammar, means before me rather than before my face.
So the words are not really related. They just sort of kind of sound
their origin, they're certainly related. Panai is my face. When it's with the lamed preposition, that's where we get the grammaticalization of it. But it's so translation wise, we shouldn't necessarily be thinking that every time you see lifnei, they're evoking the face. But if you look it up in the lexicon, you're going to see it on the lifnei connected with panim. I mean, because it is. Historically, it is the word panim. It just goes through this kind of shift over time.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah, grammatic. There's a whole like language changes and stuff, especially with the Hebrew language, where the Hebrew Bible, where we have representations of multiple stages of Hebrew. Sometimes we can see these kind of shifts, grammaticalization shifts. If you compare certain idioms like in Kings to Chronicles, right, where you have basically the same story, but for a later audience, you see some of these language shifts happen. Which happens for all of us, not just in pronunciation, but grammar-wise, languages are always changing. I was reminded of this recently. I feel like somebody was talking about old movies. And, you watch an old movie. This is more accent-wise, but you watch an old movie and it sounds like they're acting. It's like more theatrical, but actually they're talking with the normal accents of their time, right? It's just, that's not the way that we don't speak in the kind of the formal ways that 2 generations ago did. So it sounds overly formal to us, and we will sound that way to 2 generations after us. The languages are just always shifting. Okay, well, thank you all for your participation. I'm trying to spread the word. I don't know if if people are getting a taste for it. I mean, you're all here, so you can tell me, but deciding, maybe not every week, and that's fine. And if you decide that, that's fine. But if this can be useful, you think, or if I can do things a little differently that might make it more open to a broader audience, I am all ears. I want to make it helpful and interesting. So let other people know about it. Please tell me if you have especially if I know I asked about this the first week, whether I'm reading maybe too fast, or, we could talk about the Hebrew grammar more, or what could make it more appealing to a broad audience. I just want it to be helpful. Any immediate feedback? I mean, we just have a small group of us here.
I mean, from my perspective, this has been outstanding for me. I enjoy getting to hear what people observe from the text, and whether it be grammatical things or just, I remember last week, Adrian was talking about the Lord will see to it. And that really changed my own thinking about some things. And I was like, that's so much better than what I've always thought. So I'm like, for me, this has been good, and I really enjoy. I can't speak to everybody else, but
right,
it's been good for me.
Good, thankful for that.
Yeah, same here. I really appreciate that you're taking the time to do this. Just to, there's not another way to do this. Like reading by itself is not the same.
Right.
So this is really, really helpful.
Okay. Well, great. I mean, you all are here, so I expect that you're getting something from it. Not maybe Andrew, you're maybe doing this. I don't think you're doing this by obligation. He's my graduate assistant, but so if you have ideas though, or if you know people who this might be good for, let me know. All right, well, thank you all, and we'll read Genesis 18 next Wednesday at 9. Adonai Imachem.